The problems with London's air are indisputable. The solutions appear less so. Today, the latest plan to fix it, the government's clean air strategy, which includes a clampdown on wood-burning stoves. But to critics, the absence of any plans to reduce diesel emissions is the more pressing concern, as our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
In less than a year, London will boast the world's first ultra-low emission zone, but it won't apply to river traffic on the Thames or to the diesel trains which race through inner-city suburbs belching toxic fumes. Today, the government unveiled its latest plan to tackle dirty air, and it left the Green lobby deeply disappointed. The government's new strategy talks about cutting pollution from wood-burning stoves and farming. Ministers argue transport emissions are only part of the problem, but many environmental campaigners take issue with that. Like the Mayor, they believe diesel is the biggest menace when it comes to the health of Londoners.
Half of the nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter comes from transport. The other half comes from construction, from housing and from other issues as well. We've got to make sure that the government means what it says today about accepting the problems we have with the polluting air in London.
The government does have a plan to tackle the threat from the internal combustion engine, a complete ban, but not for more than 20 years.
I think the government strategy so far has been ambitious. We've said that we need to make sure that we get rid of petrol and diesel cars by 2040, new petrol and diesel cars off our road.
By the time that happens, pupils at Goose Green Primary School in Southwark are likely to have children of their own. This is a school where they're so worried about pollution, they're putting air purification units in the classrooms.
It's a sticking plaster over a much bigger wound, but I do think it's the way forward for the time being that we protect the children that are in danger at the moment.
It's something that really concerns people in London, and it really needs to be looked at urgently as a priority.
It is definitely a concern for me in that every day he's playing in an area where there are cars going past all the time.
London's Mayor once again called on the government to fund a diesel scrappage scheme, but it has a price tag of £500 million, and there are no signs ministers are willing to cough up. Simon Harris, ITV News.
Next tonight, the new Home Secretary today said he would look again at the resources allocated to police after the first half of this year saw a sharp rise in violent crime. There have already been more than 60 murders in London in 2018. Today, Sajid Javid said he would look at whether cuts to police budgets were to blame. Our political correspondent Simon Harris has more.
It's not safe anymore to hang around.
It's not the police that are in control.
The government don't do nothing for us.
Hardly a week goes by without someone dying violently on our streets. As the death toll heads relentlessly towards 70 in less than 6 months, the killers seem ever more brazen. Marcel Campbell, one of the most recent victims of the violence, was stabbed to death in Islington on Monday. It was early evening. The pavement was busy with pedestrians, including children. These are the two politicians Londoners are looking to for solutions. Today, the Mayor was pictured on a police raid, while the new Home Secretary gave his first major speech, and they both came armed with sound bites.
There's also been a recent increase in serious violence, including homicides, knife and gun crime. I'm absolutely determined to put an end to the appalling violence that is terminating young lives so soon.
The police will do what they can with the additional resources we've invested from City Hall. They won't do it by themselves. At the same time, I'm lobbying the government. We can't have 6, 7, 8 years of cuts in our police service and expect the police to be as active and as successful as they were in the past.
The Home Secretary appeared to signal a change in the government's previous position that police numbers are not a factor.
Could it be to do with resources? I'd like to properly look at that. I'd like to look at the evidence and examine it properly. I'm not going to rush to a conclusion.
Jenny Jones was a member of the now disbanded Metropolitan Police Authority. She's observed closely the work of 3 London mayors.
Sadiq is making all the right noises. I am concerned that he doesn't have a very clear manifesto for policing, but quite honestly, he has talked about more youth services, early interventions, that sort of thing, which is exactly what we need. We need to stop the crime before it's even a thought.
So why was the Mayor on a police operation? He insisted it wasn't simply a photo opportunity.
I wanted to see for myself the excellent work of the new violent crime task force that we're funding from City Hall, and it's really important for the police to know that the Mayor's behind them.
The target of the raid in North London was a suspected drugs dealer with a reputation for violence. he wasn't in. But 2 men were arrested on suspicion of possessing Class A drugs. Simon Harris, ITV News.
Boris Johnson is having to explain tonight how he was tricked into discussing international politics with a pair of Russian comedians. The former mayor spent 18 minutes on the phone to them, thinking he was speaking to the president of Armenia about the sensitive issue of Britain's relationship with Russia. Our political correspondent Simon Harris has more.
When Boris Johnson walked into the presidential palace in Chile this week, he could be pretty sure the man he was meeting was the real thing. But not all of the Foreign Secretary's diplomatic encounters are quite what they seem.
Hello, good afternoon. It's Boris Johnson here.
Good afternoon, Foreign Secretary. Do you hear me?
Yes, I hear you very well. Who is that?
This is Prime Minister.
Pashinyan?
This is, yeah.
Prime Minister, may I congratulate you?
Boris Johnson thought he was taking a call from the Prime Minister of Armenia. In fact, he was talking to a Russian comedian, one half of a pair known as Vovan and Lexus.
As you know, I have a meeting with President Putin in Sochi. I hope he will not poison me with Novichok.
But the gags weren't all one way. The Foreign Secretary made a joke about Russians in London.
You throw a stone in Kensington and you'll find you hit an oligarch.
The pretend Prime Minister then claimed Russia's President Putin had boasted about his power over Jeremy Corbyn.
He says that he has influence over the leader of Labour Party, Mr. Corbyn.
He told you that he was influencing Jeremy Corbyn?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much for that interesting tidbit of information.
Towards the end of the 18-minute phone call, it seems the Foreign Secretary realised he'd been had.
Hello? Hello?
Alexei Stolyarov told ITV News their first attempt at the prank phone call failed, but then they rang Sir Alan Duncan, a Foreign Office minister, and it was one of his officials who arranged the call to Boris Johnson.
Sometimes it's really easy, but sometimes it doesn't work. We tried to reach Boris Johnson earlier when we called him as officials from Ukraine, but his office declined our requests. But he was really happy to talk to new Prime Minister of Armenia, so we were lucky.
Why did you talk to Russian hackers? Did you know who you were talking to?
This afternoon, Boris Johnson was saying nothing as he was driven away from his official home.
It's just astonishing, Simon. I mean, has the former mayor actually said anything since that?
Well, tonight the Foreign Office appears to be blaming the Kremlin. One source said it was the latest attempt to save face after the nerve agent attack in Salisbury. Now, I put that to Lexus, Alexei Stolyarov, earlier, and he denied emphatically that he was any kind of Russian government stooge. But then I suppose if he was, he would say that, wouldn't he? Yeah. The pair have a history of these sort of pranks. Sir Elton John was an earlier victim of one of their calls. They said it was relatively easy to get through to the Foreign Office, and that will cause some embarrassment, at least to officials, if not to Boris Johnson. Now, one senior diplomatic source said Boris Johnson rumbled them pretty quickly and ended the call, but he did take more than a quarter of an hour.
It's very true. Simon, thanks very much.